We have come to the end of the questioning of Jon Boutcher at the undercover policing inquiry. That marks the end of phase 3 of tranche 3. John Mitting has just done a series of thanks, which included thanking the public gallery for not being disruptive, which, quite frankly, we were insulted by. But insulted ourselves by failing to disrupt anything over the last 6 years. In theory, this is the end of the in-person hearings that John Mitting will oversee. There needs to be a new chair for future hearings. There will be some virtual hearings in October. Jon Boutcher finished off his questioning. I think he really, despite the fact that he's been so incredibly damning of the SDS, using all the superlatives to say how absolutely awful they were, when it came to his own time in charge, when any oversight of the reports were being filed by the officers during that period, and the documents that they were using, such as the SDS tradecraft manual, he claimed no knowledge. His lack of memory about being informed about things which he says he should have known about, and he would have known if he had been told about it, he would remember, was a bit more evasive than anything else we've heard from him today. But overall, he has been by far the most critical of all witnesses from the police side about the SDS. I am joined by Paul Heron, an occasional appearance on this on these videos, one of the lawyers representing the Public Interest Law Centre, and Kate Wilson of Police Spies Out of Lives. Paul, what did you make of Jon Boutcher today? Use the microphone close to your mouth.
Oh, yeah, of course. So I think the first thing is I'd definitely encourage people to read his statements. He's the only officer, the only manager, certainly the only officer, to actually apologise to everybody and to all Londoners for the way in which the SDS unit has conducted itself. And it's interesting, I think one or two of the other managers who came before him have picked up on that, actually. I think Condon made a point of apologising to everybody when he hadn't said that into his statement. So he's clearly had an impact in that sense. That's where I'll leave my answer. I've got other points to make, but I thought I'd let you, if you want to ask Kate a question.
Yeah. Okay, well, what did you make of it overall? What did you make of what he had to say?
Well, I mean, so he was very critical of the SDS. He can be. He shut it down. Yeah. There's no stains on him, and he's still, the questions that could have reflected bad on him, he still didn't remember or claimed to have had no knowledge and passed the buck away. It wasn't, he was apologetic. He was incredibly critical, but he was also very clear that it wasn't his fault. What really struck me was his points about the Chiz Act, and about undercover policing today, because he pretty much said this inquiry's done its job. We've got the Chiz Act. For anyone who doesn't know about the Chiz Act essentially makes all of the misconduct that we've been hearing about lawful, and therefore no longer a problem. Not because they're not committing crimes, not because they're not sleeping with women, but because it's now there's a statute that says they're allowed to do it. So I found that concerning. I found, and then he was saying, we've been learning from this inquiry, and undercover policing is now completely unrecognisable, and that really brought up for me the fact that the Home Office does now want to curtail the inquiry, leave it at the historic stuff, and I don't think that's enough. I don't think all Londoners can trust them anymore. I think we need the inquiry to look at the more recent policing, look at how the regulations that he's talking about worked in practice. That was my takeaway.
But the other thing I would say about it is to take an analysis of his criticisms. His criticisms of the SDS were completely valid in terms of the training, in terms of the management, in terms of the supervision, etc., in terms of the intrusion and the type of reporting and the collateral intrusion, etc. But I think it really misunderstands what the SDS was set up for and why it was set up. I mean, Special Branches, we know, was set up to originally combat Irish Republican terrorism in Britain, and it developed from there. And in particular, the SDS takes its legacy from that in terms of spying on communists, on activists, on trade unionists, and whatever. And I think the fact that the matter is, he's criticising it from a a criminal side. Was the reality was the SDS was an intelligence-only organization that was set up precisely to be intrusive, precisely to record everything, whether it's who the babysitting rota of the SWP, or somebody's job, or somebody's applied for work, or an activist. And so, yes, it's right to criticize it, but I think he's missing the point of what the SDS was actually set up for, which was precisely what it was doing throughout its history. And I think he approached it from a very managerial point of view in terms of its criticism. Sorry, Kate.
Which is what a lot of the managers who've come up before have said. They've said these officers came in and they didn't understand what we were doing, and we were doing exactly what we were set up to do. I don't think that the two things are necessarily contradictory, in the sense that what they were set up to do is deeply questionable, and particularly like the necessity, and I think to an extent somebody coming at it from a criminal background, and we saw this with the IPT when the police went to the IPT and said, well, all of this has to be done in secret, and the IPT turned around and said, well, you do realize that our secret powers are not there to protect the police from embarrassment, and that there is an element of ordinary people, including ordinary people who work in counter-terror or national security, look at this and feel that it is deeply, intrinsically and inherently wrong that they're doing this kind of spying. And I think that where Special Branch was unique and exceptional is in their fundamental belief that what they were doing was right. And that's where a lot of that.
I was struck really, it was quite telling that when he was asked about disruption and the role of the SDS in disruption, something which has been brought up a lot over time, and it's only there have been two witnesses this week, Janet Williams and Julian McKinney, who have admitted that, yes, not only was disruption part of the role of the SDS, but McKinney was very clear it was the biggest strength of the SDS. He accepted it may well not have been lawful, but as far as customers were concerned, that was the area where the SDS excelled, is what they were good at. When this was brought up today with Boutcher, he was like, I wouldn't know anything about that. That would have been outside lawful activity. And just batted away the question completely. And I think it's the disruption which is one of the things which has been denied so heavily throughout the witnessing we've heard from the SDS officers, but really goes to the heart of something which we've known as activists throughout, and has been, I think, the most damaging part of this whole thing, in terms of like the democratic deficit, all this kind of stuff, that it's the disruptive nature of the SDS, and the fact that he was unwilling to speak to that at all shows, as you say, it's a managerial criticism he's got, is that they weren't filling in their forms properly, they weren't they were having too much overtime, they were reporting stuff they shouldn't have been writing down. I mean, it was very much kind of about the technicalities rather than the spirit of it.
No, I mean, I do agree with that. I mean, I do welcome his criticisms, and if people get the opportunity to read his statement when it's put online, and certainly the other statement we put in a statement, partly our position statement was based on his legitimate criticisms of the SDS, and I think we've got to welcome, on one level, we've got to welcome that. Definitely, we've definitely got to welcome that. But I think, as I said before, it kind of does miss the point. One thing which I think was also missing from the evidence today, which I think counsel to the inquiry was trying to tease out of him, was also he was kind of seeing it as you said, Tom, a kind of managerial issue, and certain forms weren't filled out, and the supervision should have been better, and this would have countered the worst excesses of it. What he didn't seem to grasp was how much the people above him actually knew. He seemed to have, like, the book is going to stop with me, and it's almost like he's been designed to go in effectively to shut it down, even though he said, well, we wanted to give it a chance, but I wonder when he was actually there to shut it down.
The SDS certainly thought that he was.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is there was no acknowledgement of how, he didn't seem to be that interested about what other people knew above him. Commissioners through the years, he's saying, well, the DI should have known this, and the detective, the sergeant should have known it. Well, the commissioners knew it. The people above the commissioners, the cabinet knew it. I mean, Sirachi was we've all got examples, but as an example, Sarati was his reporting was claimed by the cabinet. His reporting was welcomed by the cabinet, and it's those questions which I think, on top of all the other stuff, also wasn't addressed today. The kind of, well, did you look above? Who else knew you? You there to do an honest assessment of this, which on one level you did, but you didn't completely. You're pointing down at lower management when actually you should also have been looking up. Maybe I'm being a bit too critical, but I would have liked to have seen a bit more of reflection on that as well.
I think it's as you said, there's so much to welcome in what he's had to say today. I mean, it's a complete sea change from anything else we've really heard. I mean, even like yesterday there was a lot of criticism, but I mean today was another level really of criticism. He used all the superlatives about how disgusting, offensive, obscene, disgusting, appalling. I mean, I can't remember all the ones he used, but
a lot.
It was a lot. There was a lot of it, and he kept reiterating them, and he kept coming back to he shut down the SDS, but they should have been shut down years earlier. He pointed at certain times he was absolutely damning of Bob Lambert, which is always going to play well with this crowd. I mean, there was lots of very strong statements that he made throughout it, which we haven't been hearing from any police officers.
I would say
he also pointed to the irony of the fact that how the people destroying the trust in the police force were the police officers, and the people restoring it was us at the back who had been spied on and been doing all that. Which I was a bit like.
I didn't like that.
I'm not sure I want to be that. I'm not sure I'm here to restore trust.
The one thing I would say is this came up in Trench 1, where one of I can't remember which senior officer it was, who actually said it should have been shut down within a few years of it being operated from.
Well, Mitting said that in his interim report.
Exactly. And the other thing is the disruption which you pointed at, Tom, it was certainly not a new thing. If we go back to Rick Gibson and his going up the ladder into the troops out movements, effectively becoming the de facto leader for 6 months, shows that disruption was very much, welcomed by the SDS. Maybe not to that level. They kind of got their hands burnt a little bit because obviously Gibson nearly got exposed. But disruption was very much to the heart of the SDS.
It was the first operation when it was the Special Operations Squad. The very first thing they were tasked with doing was making sure that the second national march against the Vietnam War was not to Grosvenor Square. It was to Hyde Park. They were successful in doing that. That was the great success. It was always from day one about disruption, and throughout the entire history of the unit, disruption has been the main goal. I mean, as much the intelligence gathering. I mean, we've seen
intelligence is crap.
Exactly.
I don't know what use a lot of that intelligence could, apart from
continuation,
but also disruption.
Yes.
Some of the kind of intelligence gathering about people's personal lives and how people were fighting with each other. But honestly, from an actual having been there, having been organizing the actions and having seen the reports, I'm like, that is not what I would have reported if I had been intending to police what I was doing.
Yeah, 100%.
Like the intelligence gathering is odd.
Yes,
it's crap.
Yeah, and it's about identifying people to turn them into informers. It's about disruption on a myriad of ways, about splitting people apart, about destroying relationships, about destroying connections between groups. It's about.
If we take that as which I agree with you, Tom, take that as read. And in terms of the reports being not very good or being, downright made up, it did serve a purpose. And the purpose was to, obviously to keep as much, ultimately the amount of times we've had evidence of officers saying we wanted to hoover up all the information, which, is worrying because they're keeping, if we look at the files that we've seen mentioned, it's literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of files of anybody who's become, even in a small way, politically active. I mean, we had files historically from the Tenants Union, law centres had files, the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers, all small organisations had files. This is
not historic. Nowadays we have Prevent, where like teachers and GPs are required to report on people when they're children.
But I think the layer and the extent of the reporting actually still sort of shocks me when I see the name of an individual and a file reference number and a file opened and information going on there, and just anything is used, and some of it lays dormant for years, but obviously can be used as and when, can be used for blacklisting, can be used for compromise, can be used just because it's there, and at some point it is there. And I think that's the real, for me, is one of the main shocking things. I mean, there's so many shocking things, but that is still, and it is about the extent of the reporting and the files and the union branches and the individuals and all that is still quite shocking to me, even now. And I consider myself quite worldly wise, but it's still a real shock. But I think in terms of today's evidence, one thing I would recommend anybody who's watching this or hears Tom or hears anybody is to read Boutcher's statement. I would definitely recommend our position statement. It should be read, because I think we do an analysis of Boutcher, and we wrote it, myself and my colleague Piers Marquis from Dowling Street. We wrote it. I would certainly recommend that. And it's a really serious analysis of how bad the SDS was. But for all the reasons, Kate, and you've made clear, the SDS was more than just a managerial fuck, pardon my French, but a managerial mistake.
I think we need to. I think we need to start calling it institutionally anti-democratic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think that there is an element of what you're saying about the reasons why it's there and the way that it functions for so long that we need to name.
I think that for me, I think that the key phrase is the exaggeration of perceived risk, because I mean, we've seen it throughout every way in which these officers have engaged with the inquiry and they've talked about their own role. But in terms of on a wider level, the exaggeration of perceived risk. I think a perfect example is the other day we saw that document which about Fitwatch, about Emily Apple and the other unnamed activists who set up Fitwatch, were looking to target the homes of the forward intelligence team officers and their families, which obviously nonsense, but ratcheted things up that allowed a level of violence against protesters that they were looking for reasons for. And I think there's a very direct correlation between the bullshit intelligence the SDS were collecting and the violence that's meted out by public order officers at demonstrations.
It came up in at the Heathrow climate camp, in the reports about the policing of the Heathrow climate camp, buried in there somewhere. And I remember this from when we were investigating the IPT, because they claim Heathrow as one of the successes of MPOIU policing. And buried in the investigations into the policing of that, there is a reference to a vicious cycle of intelligence coming out of the camp, being passed to the public order police who were policing the camp, leading to an increase in policing, leading to an increase in anger and unrest inside the camp that is then fed back in intelligence, ratcheting it up. And that's what it was for.
Yes, completely. And I think it happens on that micro scale of like individual events, but it also happens on a macro scale, which leads to protests being viewed as a form of criminality. I mean, it's now classed as terrorism. We've got, there's been. I'll come back to this today. There have been mass arrests outside Westminster Magistrates Court of pensioners who are holding signs saying, "I support Palestine action." I oppose genocide, and it's complete criminality. Well, classed as terrorism. What would be?
I've actually heard that the police have been going up to people and saying, "Do you support Palestine action?" and then arresting them when they say yes, which sounds like entrapment to me.
I think one of the other things that is the issue of RIPA, because I think RIPA will be engaged if you're involved in what's called serious criminal offences. And my understanding is, for the purposes of RIPA, a serious criminal offence is anything that would attract 3 years or more. Well, if you work that on the basis of what people are getting for holding up a sign, potentially at least, then it potentially could attract serious criminal offence, therefore attracts RIPA, which ticks the boxes, and lo and behold, you've got a file. I think the 3-year limit is all well and good, but the way that the legislation is now, worrying thing is the fact that basic everyday protesting now potentially attracts 3-year sentences or more, which is, it's very, very, very serious. I'm thinking more in the kind of macro way, as you said. But going back to today, people should watch him. Very interesting, but it kind of misunderstands that. I think it misunderstands why the SDS was there and what it was for and why it was formed, and also, as we say, why it was wrong and why people should be, still concerned about this, should be conscious of this because of, as Kate says, the serious attacks on democratic rights, our democratic rights, whether you're an environmental activist, whether you're a trade unionist, whether you are, even someone involved in, better housing. It's we're moving into a position where we have to become even more organised and better organised to ensure that our rights and our democratic rights are protected. Yeah.
I think there's something important to say though as well about the managerial side of it, and like the whole of this tranche, and listening to all of the witnesses, and even taking into account that a lot of them are claiming ignorance, a lot of them are opting for stupidity and bad management as opposed to malicious intent as what they're how they're going to explain what happened. But even taking that into account, I've been struck by how bad the management seems to be, how bad the record keeping seems to be, but specifically, it's hard to know, because maybe actually it all was very efficiently managed and intended, and all of
it
the
is
misconduct.
strikingly bad.
Some of it seems strikingly bad, and what it's made me think is, we already had a finding in the Daniel Morgan investigation that the Metropolitan Police were institutionally corrupt. And, I use that phrase a lot because, but I'd never really thought about what it means. And I think what it means is what we're seeing. It's a combination of the completely rotten culture and then structures that just have no way of dealing with, don't want to deal with, look the other way, don't ask, don't tell, all of those aspects that they clearly go all the way up the chain. There's the way that they've answered the questions.
Just picking up on that, because it is a really important point. It's easy to dismiss Boutcher just saying it's a management issue, because I think what today's evidence was interesting is the fact that he was particularly condemning certain reports for the way they were and what they were and how they were, etc. But it is interesting that it's not a question of good or bad management, but it is interesting to note how these reports from these officers have informed both the local and national control strategy.
He willfully misunderstood that question, which was very irritating.
To kind of how it controls the national strategy towards campaigning groups. And the SDS played a very important role in providing that information to the control strategy or to policing strategies in the Metropolitan Police. So I'll give you one example from my own client's perspective, and you'll know this. The Welling demonstration, which they keep referring to as a riot in Welling, the policing was partly informed, not completely. So I'm not trying to make out this report formed everything, but was partly informed by Trevor Morris's fabricated reports, which fed into the Metropolitan Police's strategy. Now, whether they were just using that report to inform their strategy or the report informed their strategy anyway, but it led to the policing being overzealous, over-equipped. You had literally thousands of officers.
Brutal.
You had effectively what, from my client's perspective, a trap, which they were then set upon. But from that micro basis, the macro picture is a lot of this really bad reporting informed the control strategy, which all the different departments fed into, but also got out of. And a crucial part of that bad control strategy was the SDS reporting into it. And so that's where, in some ways, the bad reporting and the bad management fed into that, which led to bad policing. Now, that's not an argument for it all being better, but that's how these things play out from a very micro point of view outwards, that it's so badly managed, whether that's deliberate, whether it's turning a blind eye, whether I think there's a sense with a lot of police and a lot of police managers of a perception of the left, a perception of socialists and trade unionists and environmentalists. There's a perception which they want to believe, and they're often more concerned with what the left is doing, whereas they're happy to leave the fascists and the Nazis alone, who are the real enemies of democratic rights, as we know, both historically and more recently. I think what Kate said is really important, because on that, even on that micro level, it does inform a lot of really bad strategic decisions as well.
And I mean, he was directly asked, you know, there weren't any breaches, were they?
There was a breach this morning, but nothing this afternoon.
Nothing this afternoon. So he was directly asked about this control strategy. Now, the control strategy was being set by
Cabinet Office, Home Office, and Secret Services jointly.
Yes, and
government departments and the MPS, etc.
The MPS and I think ACPO. They would have these meetings, and they would basically set the priorities for what the threats are to the nation. And I suspect actually beyond, because I've seen, you know, stuff from the French police, which was clearly being informed by the MPOIU, and you know, there are European
He did infer a lot of overseas stuff today.
I mean, there are European policing groups that sit down together and decide what the policing priorities are. And he was asked to what extent the frankly shite reporting, which everybody now agrees and accepts, including a lot of the officers who wrote the reports, is absolute shite, to what extent that was feeding up into those meetings and helping to inform those decisions about what the priorities were. And he, as you say, didn't look up. He looked down. And he said, well, I think the SDS weren't really following the control strategy, and I think they were operating outside the control strategy. And it's like, yeah, but that wasn't the question. The question was, to what extent was the control strategy following the SDS, not to what extent was the SDS following
fed into the control strategy. But the other interesting point, the other separate point, just stream of consciousness thinking, because, you know, it's the end of the week and I'm knackered.
Yes.
But the other thing that was interesting is the fact that it's all the commissioners and all the leading bodies knew from one level to the other what was going on. The annual reports were all there. They were being fed information, and for me today whilst it was very good, it was the punching down as opposed to looking up. And I think that was. But I think Kate's point about the control strategy, I think people need to, you know, the SDS fed into the control strategy, as did other departments, and they got stuff, not just the SDS. They were a minor player, but still an important player, and that was all fed in to a strategy that coordinated throughout.
But also, and this is what has been driving me mad for at least the last 2 weeks, if not the last like 5 years, is, or certainly since we started T3, is they're skirting around the National Public Order Intelligence Unit. And the MPOIU was set up 1998. I think they started deploying officers in 1999, and it was set up alongside the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and alongside the National Intelligence Model. You know, it's not like the SDS. They like the SDS because they can say, well, it was set up in 1968. It was a different world then. It, you know, it was outmoded and it needed to be shut down. The MPOIU wasn't. The MPOIU was absolutely up to the minute modern.
They had NUTAC training. They had all the regulations.
They had you know, cover officers who sat and monitored the officers hour by hour. They had intrusive management, and it still didn't work. And
it did work.
Exactly. That's the thing. So all of the things that they're saying are what went wrong.
There's one point, just not to we should come back to that point, but one thing I noticed as well is an interesting point was when Boutcher was taken to the successes, you know, where they were trying to sell the SDS and the successes of the SDS in that recent period. I think it was
5 years.
Period just before Boutcher closed it down. And the successes they listed were actually all failures, or they were just made up. So the Sharon incident, completely made up. The idea that the Gulf War, the anti-Gulf War, the anti-Iraq demonstrations organised by my client Stop the War Coalition, were going to end up in a riot. Never happened. You know, the fact that the anti-Iraq demos were going to be 10 times. Well, you didn't really need to be a genius to work that out. But all this intelligence that they said was a success was just not a success. And it's not surprising that these, you know, Boutcher and McKinney looked at this and just thought, nah, this is just bollocks. This is just wrong.
But
anyway,
what is surprising though is that so many of the managers didn't.
Yeah.
And that's where I come back to my point about institutional corruption. Is, you know, any normal person looking at this stuff goes, nah.
And there is a lot. There was, I mean, throughout the Tranche 3 period, through this evidential period, just take an example, there was a number of examples of clear corruption where people were clearly, it was, let's continue this unit. You know, if we think of the false tenancy agreement, the fact that even the witness today, Boutcher, made the point that actually the officers were probably on double their salary. So there's a real reason to continue this. How do you continue it? Well, you continue it by making more elaborate stories just to keep it going. And there was that absolutely institutional corruption.
Just to say, I mean, it was worked out that by the time Boutcher was enrolled, that the SDS officers were on about £5,630 a month. Which, I mean, you know, like it was pointed out that senior
25 years ago,
and the senior management would have been on less than them. Which, I mean, says a lot. I mean, I think it's also, and one of the things, I mean, I think because today and yesterday's witness have engaged with the process. Like, you know, I don't respect them. I think they're bastards. I'm not defending the police in any way. But I mean, it should be pointed out that all the other police witnesses have basically spat in the face of the chair the entire time they've been sat in that witness stand.
And they've said they've not looked at anything. They've not. They have no idea about anything. They haven't heard anything about the inquiry.
Right. So I mean, we've got a situation where we've only just had a very small glimpse of any witnesses who are willing to actually engage with the questions and give. And I'm sure that they are holding things back. I'm sure that there was plenty of lies that were said over the last 2 days. But these are officers who have at least spoken in complete sentences and have not just gone about everything. You know, for the most part,
my favourite was, I can't remember which officer it was when asked about the Macpherson inquiry, said,
Colin Black.
What's that?
Colin Black. Yeah, Colin Black.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Did not know what the outcome of the Macpherson inquiry was. And when he was told it was institutional racism, he said, oh, was it? I mean, you know,
it's just nonsense.
Farce, absolute farce. I mean, I think, you know, and this has mirrored the way that they act as police officers. They have no respect for the law. They have no respect for any legal instrument. The contempt was absolutely palpable throughout. So, I mean, in terms of like insight, I mean, like when people talk about what's the point of the inquiry, and we've got this whole issue with an attempt by the state to try and shut down the inquiry process, is that, you know, what is the point when so many of the officers just do not engage with it with any candor? And I mean, we've now got new legislation coming along that theoretically will force them to have some sort of candor. But I mean, it does mean that when we have someone like today or yesterday where it's like, oh, they're actually saying something, we get all quite excited and we're like, oh, this is quite good. But in reality, this should be the bare fucking minimum.
But I do think that, I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying when I say this is institutional corruption in action. And if you weren't seeing that, if you didn't get manager after manager starting with the undercover officers and then going right up the chain, just showing that contempt for the process and for the public and for the truth, then I don't know, I feel like I've used the term institutional corruption a lot, but now I actually understand what I mean by it.
I think I agree with Kate. It shows institutional corruption. I think I've been, whether shocked is the word, is in terms of some of the managers, how they've turned, either they're not very good at what their job is, or they're, as we said before, absolutely, you know, completely convinced of it because they're getting trips, they're getting money and all the rest of it. And also it comes from the politics of certain police officers, maybe all of them, whatever, because they despise anyone who's got any kind of progressive views. And yet, when you put to them, well, we're on the right side of history because history's shown that we've been right, whether it's apartheid, the polls, whatever. In terms of how useful it's been, I think for a whole layer of activists, it's been useful. And it's been useful when you go and talk to other people so that they can understand how we organised in the past. It's probably a bit.
I think we might have just crashed.
I think Facebook's got bored.
Phone call came in.
Yeah, that's really irritating. Sorry, that was
Facebook.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
Oh,
it didn't
I
go.
thought Facebook got bored then, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
But I think it's been useful because it's given lots of people, activists, members of the public, an insight into the nature of how the law or the police has been used against campaigners, and yet it's still, despite all that, it's still failed. It's succeeded in some. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be like, oh, everything's fine. It certainly isn't. But in terms of lots of campaigns, have still succeeded. Have still got on. Have still won things. Whether it's big historical international things, solidarity movements, or even local campaigns. And I think it's been useful because it's moved the veil behind what is going on, even in a small way, even in a little way. I think it's moved the veil. So I think for all those purposes, on a political basis, it's been very useful.
But going back to the point I made about how frustrating I find it that because they can say, and he did say, undercover policing today is completely unrecognizable from what it was
Seismic
then.
changes.
Seismic changes, and as a result of what we've heard in this inquiry. But
paying tribute to the activists who've lobbied for this inquiry, allowing it all to change.
And restore trust. I mean, they're glossing over this whole chunk of the terms of reference of the inquiry, which needs to look at the stuff that happened more recently.
I think just to take up the point, so I know I'm sounding like the middle person being like, oh, this is just great, but it's an interesting when I was working on the Shrewsbury case. I was representing Ricky Tomlinson and Arthur Murray.
So those names up.
Yeah. His name dropping. Sammy Davis Jr. was there too. No, but Ricky was like, what's the point? What's the point of doing this? Actually, he said, what's the point of doing this? Because even if my conviction is quashed, he says it will allow them to just say, we've corrected it. We're sorry. We're sorry. And he was like, they can never be sorry. They can. And I'll never forgive them because it allows them to kind of correct and move on and say, and then say, well, look, this is how we correct ourselves. This is how we're sorry. And so there is that side of things, but I'd still stand on the basis of, it's been positive, I think, to shake the tree to see what's there, because I think both individually, collectively, organizationally, we can use the information and the thing that's come out for our benefit going forward. I hope. I mean,
I always come back to the point that everything matters. Everything always matters, and you don't drop anything. Like, follow everything down. There was absolutely no reason not to force every single step. With this process, I've always gone for the idea of absolute maximalism. We're trying to get as much out of it as we possibly can. I know that it's going to fail, but I think back when I was a teenager and I first got involved in anarchist activism, I always knew that it was going to end in defeat.
But also, I think that there are. I agree. I took part in a lot of actions that I knew were going to end in defeat, and it's not about, it's not about the ends justifying the means.
Can I just say,
it's about,
as a Marxist, when I took part in things, I always thought we'd win.
We'll fool you. We'll fool you, mate.
Yeah. And we did. Sometimes.
Yeah.
But we win things.
Yeah.
Sure.
You don't necessarily win the whole thing. And for me, some of the stuff that we have uncovered, particularly around the things that I was involved in, I mean, and the stuff that's come out about Reclaim the Streets, and particularly the extent of the secret moves to disrupt and destroy Reclaim the Streets, has really helped me make sense of a very important part of my political history and what happened. And it is staggering what we found, you know, like, and the process of working on the Reclaim the Streets witness statement and going through all of that material and sitting down with people who I was active with 26 years ago, and reading this stuff and looking back on what happened and reassessing it and you know, realizing the way that they, and I think I felt the same around kind of Emily Apple's evidence and tying together the overt policing and the covert policing that was going on. It's really important, and it makes you realize how that, you know, they did, and some of them have even said it in terms, groups were policed out of existence.
Yes, completely.
And that's really important to know.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We've had a number of comments. We should just go through some of them.
One on each shop.
Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance has said he was way too clear that the Home Office was in the clear. Yeah, I mean, some people have said that it was like he was auditioning for the top job at the Met. There's a lot of very political answers. Here from Proudhon. We are so lucky that all this was fixed after Jon Boutcher shut the SDS down. Charles de Menez wasn't murdered. Ex-pigs didn't use their cover to prey on women up until 2018. Yeah, quite frankly, yeah, it was ridiculous the way in which he tried to pretend everything was okay now. Today was proof of what we already knew. None of them were ever stopped. It's still going on, and that's why they want the inquiry stopped in its tracks, so they can say it was bad, but now it's fixed.
On that point, if you didn't see the video that Tom and I did earlier, we have set up a website where you can sign up and send a message to the Home Office saying that you don't think this inquiry should be shut down, that there still is important stuff that needs to come out, that there are still dozens, hundreds of people waiting for answers about the abuses that they suffered. And it's ucpi.uk. And if you go there, you can click through, you can just sign, there's a model letter there, or you can edit it and write your own letter. And we need people to let the Home Office know that this inquiry is important and that we're not going to let them get away with shutting it down.
Absolutely. Another comment, it was different time back then. No, it wasn't. The most racist, sexist, violent creatures were the pigs guarding the crooked establishment, and they still are in 2026. Absolutely. A lot of comments about the fact it's still working. What hope for democracy when police have contempt for the law? Yeah, well, quite. I mean, 'twas ever thus. It's been a stressful 7 weeks. I think this set of phase of hearings. For the most part, it's been all the officers, the management of the police, which has been in the past. We have had Helen Steele giving evidence over a number of days, but in other phases we've had a mixture of civilian and police witnesses that has kind of given a bit of an up and down.
This one has been pretty relentless.
Yeah, very much. I think as ever we've learned a lot. We've had a lot of things confirmed that we've always suspected, and I think we knew, and we turns out we did. But I mean, just like reflecting on it now, I mean, there is still a few little bit more to come, but we've completed the SDS. I mean, what the overwhelming feeling I'm left with is how little of the SDS we've looked at, how few elements beyond the areas that we found out about ourselves that have actually been exposed by the inquiry, the huge amount of process that is taking place in closed, how even when you take the closed into consideration, how much of that has been just... You know, there's still loads that's not happening. Lots of key characters who have not been called. People who are alive and well, who are referenced repeatedly in the documents, who have not appeared. Not to mention the activists who haven't been called. I mean, like Dave Smith should have been called. I mean, for God's sake. And
honestly, counsel to the inquiry's explanation to Boutcher today of what blacklisting was really brought home how the inquiry have understood so little about what it is and why it's significant that they couldn't even explain it to the witness.
I think the other thing that's I really would have liked the inquiry to open up is the SDS was predominantly directed towards progressive movements, whether trade unions, environmentalists, socialists, whatever. But at its later years, the SDS was dragged kicking and screaming to look at, we think, elements of the far right.
Yes, yeah.
And I think apart from one undercover officer who did infiltrate the far right,
HM54,
and then found it too scary and left.
Well, for 3 months, he infiltrated the far right by going to a pub where a now defunct section of the BNP were having drinks.
Yeah.
He went to one meeting, he attended one demonstration, and then he withdrew because he felt that there was a danger that other police officers would dob him in to the far right because so many of them were sympathetic.
And there was a fear. It was too scary. I think that the idea. I think the managers were saying we couldn't infiltrate the far right because it's too risky.
Yeah, they were dangerous.
And they didn't. So, but there are. I mean, later on, as we know, there are some officers who went in to the far right, and it's just a real shame that is not being open so that we could, or even enclosed, but at least so that, you know, some RLRs and some affected CPs could attend, because those questions would be so important to understand the level of racist attacks, particularly during the time of, you know, the murder of Stephen Lawrence, Roland Adams, etc., and to understand why the police spent so much time, you know, on the, you know, the left, if you like, you know, the anti-racist at that time, the anti-fascist at the time, and seemingly ignored this situation. And what they
didn't just ignore the situation, they fucking spied on the families of the victims of the situation.
Exactly. But also a failure also to understand that their failure to act meant that, and understandably, not just politicos, but community actors were getting together to fight back against the BNP at that particular time, and the far right gang and the racist gangs at that time. And then they have the cheek then to turn around and go, well, why, you know, you were causing public disorder. And the reality was that, you know, it would be great to have seen that. It's a real shame that we're not going to be able to see that. All we're going to see is gists of maybe a few questions,
I mean, will we see gists? I mean, we hope to, but I mean, I'm not sure that we will. No. I mean, I find it particularly galling when you consider how much of that sort of stuff was inferred in the True Spies documentary, you know, 24 years ago, which was broadcast on national television. And we've had situations where we've had officers giving evidence who've been asked about things which we know were revealed in True Spies, which they've gone, oh, I don't know anything about that. And it's like, come on, this is, you know, there's been a clear, like, just avoidance of things which are in the public domain, which is ridiculous, really. And
it's particularly worrying because of the comments that Mitting made at the end of Lindsay's evidence, where he said, it all sounds really terrible, and a lot of what you've seen and what is being shown in public is really terrible, but you don't know the things that I'm seeing enclosed. And we've heard it a few times, and they say, for reasons that people in this room very well understand. And what they're saying is, you've all been threatened by the fascists. You know how dangerous they are. Like, that's why we're not giving anything away about this. But
it's bullshit. I've been threatened by the fascists quite a lot. I'm fine. Fuck off. Like, fuck off.
That's good.
Do you know what I mean? I'm absolutely fine. I'm walking around with this face with my real name all the fucking time. And I've been threatened by the fascists loads. So fuck off. The idea that they got in any sort of fucking threat is fucking pathetic.
But also, and this is a bit of a weird position to be in, but so much of the misconduct and the depth of it and the breadth of it has come out because we, the people who were being spied on, were shown the reports and were able to say, I wasn't at that meeting, but Lambert was, you know, and so much of the police documents, if you read it on the face of it, and even stuff that I've read about things where I wasn't there, I don't appreciate the depth of the corruption that is going on there until somebody who was at that meeting comes along and says, well, hang on, I was just going on holiday and we went wine tasting and went to the beach. What fucking gun?
Yeah, right, you know? Literally, yeah.
And that's in the spying on the far right as well.
Of course it is.
You know, it's not like this unit was all working together, and the ones spying on the left were like deeply twisted and corrupt, but the ones spying on the right were doing it absolutely by the book. It's all there, and the inquiry aren't going to know, and what they're going to see is what looks like, you know, very respectable operations doing very dangerous things. when actually maybe those very dangerous things were being organized, and there's some fascist out there who's going to turn around and say, I was 16, it was his idea, you know, and we're not going to get any of that evidence.
I mean, I agree entirely. Also, when it comes to far right, fuck them. You know, like,
also the other thing is, it as an intelligence, the STS is purely intelligence. You know, if racist gangs weren't planning to do something, where they're going to step in, or where they're going to
what's
let it go.
What's the far right equivalent of 6,000 mink in the Hampshire countryside?
I think that's it's a real shame. Equally, it's a shame because we put an application for a former member of National Front / BNP who wants to be a CP to explain that, and it was refused. It was refused. Just to stress, he works for Hope Not Hate now, but
and he was a really important witness, and the inquiry just didn't want to hear from it. And there's quite, you know, they didn't want to hear about that. They didn't want to hear about blacklisting. You know, there's a lot of things that they don't want to hear about. And frankly, if they could have made this inquiry all about the deceived women and the Lawrences, they would have done. And it's only because we got the disclosure, and it's only because those of us who sit in this room every lunchtime, you know, worked our asses off and made sure that they lifted their vision away from those two very public, powerful, you know, awful, absolutely awful. But actually, you know, and as a woman who was deceived into a sexual relationship, I think it's really important to say I was deceived into a sexual relationship because I was a political activist.
Yes, right. Yeah, exactly.
You know, I met Mark Kennedy because I was at a public meeting in a social centre. And for that to have happened, all of that other really deep, twisted corruption and institutionally anti-democratic policing had to happen. Otherwise, I would never have faced that risk, let alone suffered that damage.
It's really important to say.
Yeah,
absolutely,
100%. And we've had some more comments. One here from Gideon Tolman. Guess who that is? Certainly, the inquiry has, for me at least, confirmed that the bloke I knew as Simon Wellings was a cop. Without the inquiry, there would always be doubt. The sheer amount of info I've seen that explains so much. It's played a vital role. I'm looking forward to the interim report coming out. With fingers crossed. The police will never be reformed or acceptable, but this inquiry has been important. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think the biggest sort of win that we've had as activists has been on the narrative. I think sometimes we forget that when we first discovered there was undercover cops in our movement, it was many years of the police saying neither confirm nor deny. We had no official confirmation. We were looked at as conspiracy theorists, and it's actually
that wouldn't happen here.
Right, exactly. That thing which Helen Steele's father said to her when she was pretty much confirmed that John Dines was a cop that she'd spent decades searching for. That winning the narrative has been an ongoing fight that we're doing every single day. It's why we do these videos. It's why we do the coverage. It's why we engage with the inquiry so deeply. It's because, you know, establishing the truth is so fucking important, and we know they're not going to be held responsible. We know they're going to get away with it. We know they're going to live out their lives with their fat pensions, but they can't deny the truth anymore because we forced it into the light, and that has been so important.
I think just flowing on from that, and again, I don't want to get in any way, shape, or form complacent. I mean, the first interim report had lots of good things for certainly for my clients, and probably took some positives from it as well. But also, I remember back to Tranche 1 and the witnesses, one or two of the witnesses who gave evidence in Tranche 1. One or two of them got a really hard time from counsel at the inquiry.
Yes.
And I think that has slowly changed. I'm not saying that people don't get a hard time. Don't get me wrong.
I'm not trying to be complacent. Nothing like the way that people were grilled in. I mean, they didn't actually say, "Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" But it had that feel to it.
I had Lindsay German gave evidence, I think twice. Is it twice or three times? But certainly the first time it was a grilling, and I know that. Bleppy's widow, sorry.
Celia Stubbs
got
that was horrific. It was
a terrible time.
One of the worst things I've. It was absolutely. I mean, I spoke to her. We did a video afterwards with her. I mean, I was in tears. She was incredibly strong, and it didn't fucking phase her because she's absolutely fucking.
But the point. I mean, and that was appalling. That was appalling. And Lindsay Lindsay obviously was not as not the same situation as that. But the fact that the approach has changed is because we have forced narrative. Changed and forced a different narrative and a different explanation.
I mean,
not to get to
and this is one of the things I'm really looking forward to seeing in the interim report. And I'm not holding my breath, I have to say, but the first interim report pretty much said, I am not in this report even going to entertain the suggestions made, and the implication was that they were conspiracy theorist level suggestions that this policing was ideological in nature.
Yeah.
And I want to see whether he goes back on that, because it feels like you really can't escape the ideological nature of this policing.
It was political policing.
It was political policing. There's no question about it. So, and I'm very interested, because I think that is one of the kind of last bastions that they don't want to give up.
even the approach that Boutcher's taken on, this was intelligence policing as opposed to criminal style investigation. But intelligence policing is informed by a point of view.
Of course it is.
By its very nature. And of course, if you look at the history, as going back to really the start of when we started the discussion 3 hours ago or whatever it was, but the STS special branch, the special branch, and then obviously later the STS, was informed. It was by its very nature was political, and has been all the way along. And it's been political towards predominantly progressive left, all the campaigns that you represent and I represent as well. And to say it wasn't ideological, it wasn't informed ideologically, particularly given the fact of the periods that we've been through from 68 onwards, is to completely miss the point.
And
Protecting the Queen's peace.
This is another reason.
Protecting the Queen's peace.
This is another reason why it is so important that they look at Tranche 4, because Tranche 4, because it happened under the Reaper era, has authorizations for these deployments that really spell it out. And so they say everybody, under collateral intrusion, they will say everybody in this, engaged by this operation, has views that differ from those of Her Majesty's government, and they're therefore fair game. I mean, there's very, very clear, and it's not, by the time I'm getting involved, the Cold War is over, and subversion is just not a thing. But you get this. There's the UK PLC. There's anti-capitalist campaigning, and it's all in there in the authorizations.
And I think the other thing, explicit. I think importantly, flowing from that, it actually cuts against even what Boutcher was saying today. It just needed better form filling, just better management, better supervision, better all this. And of course, the MPRU proves that even if you have all that, like you're saying, actually doesn't make a lot of difference.
What it needs, and this is why his reference to the Chiz law is so worrying, is what it needs. I mean, I don't think any of it should exist at all, but there are, we have a Human Rights Act in place, and there are it needs to be lawful, and none of it was lawful. It needs to be necessary in a democratic society. It needs to serve a pressing social need. Like there are laws that it is supposed to comply with, and it doesn't. And I mean, they've basically said, and Boutcher said it today, that public disorder, pretty much, however bad, I mean, the worst public disorder I've seen in this country is probably J18, or the best public disorder.
Come on.
Sorry. So, that I've
seen that more.
In this country was probably J18. And even that,
it's not very serious.
It doesn't actually justify this level. No. It's not proportionate. It's not necessary. And what's worrying about the Chiz Act is that it kind of twists that and makes all the misconduct and the criminal activity and everything else potentially lawful. But those points, it has to be proportionate, it has to be necessary, and it has to serve a pressing social need. But
we all know that the proportionate necessity and all the rest of it is just a tick box and a few words away, isn't it?
But that's
ideological,
but
right?
that's what's so powerful about actually getting an inquiry to examine it. I mean, the IPT looked at them all, and they said this is nonsense. They don't comply with the statutory obligations. You can't use copy paste. You can't use tick boxes. You actually have to really think about this. And
anyway, people, we're on every night.
There's more comments which we're going to go through. Love for Proud on, and they should have had Dave Smith and so many other great comrades of Vital Info.
And actually, I would say read Dave Smith's, because Dave Smith's witness statement. I don't know if it's out there yet.
I don't know either, actually.
But maybe when it comes out, we'll post a link, because Dave Smith's witness statement gives you a real glimpse of some of the stuff that the inquiry hasn't touched.
I mean, they haven't even printed. They haven't published the closing Trench 2 statements yet. So
there's so much missing. The inquiry unintentionally did no platform even for ex-fascists. I'm joking, but they should have allowed that witness. I don't know, comrade Mitting, fair play to you, mate. Fuck them. That's what I say. Indeed, all praise to the NSCP team that's been on the inquiry through thick and thin. Your efforts deserve a commendation. Yeah, well,
From the Commissioner.
From the Commissioner, great. Yeah. And some are suggesting a statue in every town to Helen Steele and everyone else involved in exposing this. I mean, no statues, comrade. No statues, no heroes. No thanks. Please be your own fucking hero. Step up. Do whatever you want to see in this world. Make it happen. Go out and do it. I don't think we need to lionize anybody for this. I don't think anybody's done anything more than what they wanted to do, quite frankly. That is it.
Great.
That is it for Tranche 3 Phase 3. We will be back in September.
3 days.
3 days in September, 21st to the 23rd. We'll be hearing from HN86, who was being forced to appear at the inquiry against his will, who will be joining us remotely. Helen Steele will be returning for some part of hearings at some point during that period. There will be closing statements in February.
Yes.
Now, the inquiry has said that this is all going to be taking place virtually.
That's right.
We were having a conversation the other day where you made a suggestion. It's all your idea.
I believe people are running with that suggestion.
Yes. Yeah. So essentially, the closing statements, that we should book a venue and have the closing statements being delivered by the non-state co-participant.
One venue.
In one venue. With our own public gallery and snacks, where you can actually have snacks in the public gallery rather than having to come in and out, which we do here.
And we'll invite the inquiry to come along if they so.
If they want to. With our rules.
We'll show them how you can do an inquiry on a budget.
Yeah, absolutely. With a master of ceremonies and all those kind of things. So look out for that. It'll cost a bit, and we do have funding problems. By the way, if you want to buy me a coffee, you're more than welcome to do so. Link in bio. But we will have funding. But if people want to see this happen, we're going to need support with it. We're going to need, a wider involvement of the movement than has been the case up until now. So kind of consider that, and something to look forward to. One more comment. Big love, gang. I was going to share that one from earlier. It's been emotional. It really has.
It really has.
It really has.
And if you don't want this to be the last that you hear from the inquiry, then go to www. Go to ucpi.uk. Sign the letter, tell the Home Office that we need to finish the inquiry, tranche 4, tranche 5, recommendations. It's all important.
And please spread that with your friends, comrades, networks.
Yes,
friends, whatever you're part of.
Exactly,
and watch this space, because we will be organising other events and other actions. But for now, sign the letter, send it in. I will say, if you have direct experience of the things that are going to come up in tranche 4 and tranche 5, maybe don't sign the letter, because I think you might have more to say than what we've put in that letter.
Well, you can send more than one letter.
You can send more than one letter, but have a think, about why it's important to you. You can edit the letter on the website, and we really need to make the point that
thousands of people.
This is important, and it's not going to go away.
100%.
And I've got a lot of MPOIU documents, so we can still hold a tranche 4, even if they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whatever happens, if they take the inquiry away from us, we're still going to be campaigning on this issue. We're not going anywhere. There's a will to win, comrades, and let's stick with it.
But please sign the letter, share it with all your friends, and if you've got ideas for how we can put pressure on, let us know.
Let's do it. Thanks ever so much for joining. Please like, share, and subscribe and all that shit, and we'll see you sooner than you think.